Well, good morning. I hope your day is off to a great start. We have a very interesting show for you today. We've reached mid-November, that time of year when anything can happen with the weather, and I do mean anything. This year they say the weather around the country will be affected by El Nino. Just what is it, and what's the likely impact on the weather here? When I have weather questions, there's just one person I go to. He'll be joining us right now.
From TV6, this is the Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, Karl Bohnak has been reporting Upper Michigan weather on TV6 for over a quarter century. There's no one else who can say that, and there probably never will be. With Karl, the weather is not just a job, it's a passion. Besides his daily reports, he's an author, and his publications include So Cold a Sky, Upper Michigan Weather Stories. Karl is my guest this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Don.
You know, your interest in weather really went back to when you were like 6 or 7 years old?
Right, first grade, and it's something that I feel so fortunate that I was able to make a career out of something that I really, like you said, have a passion for.
But there were some twists and turns in that career, because when it came time to go to college, you initially did not go into meteorology.
Right. As with a lot of people who love the weather, mathematics was a little bit of a problem. So what I did was I ended up getting a degree in communications and broadcasting, feeling that I'd work on my broadcasting skills and then maybe go back to school, and that worked out.
Well, you know, the interesting thing to me is I grew up wanting to be a radio announcer, and you grew up wanting to be a weatherman, and we both started our careers in radio.
That's interesting, yes. Yeah. And that's how I started, and that's how I got a job in TV while I was going to school for meteorology at the University of Wisconsin, because I had some radio experience, some broadcasting experience.
How did you wind up here in Marquette?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but then again not. I had a friend who I worked with in radio in Wisconsin, and we had kept in touch, and it was several years later, and he once out of the blue called me up. He knew that I wanted to get to a place where there was interesting weather, a beautiful setting, and he was programming a radio station up here in the Upper Peninsula, and he gave me a call and said, I heard that there might be a job opening at the TV station in Marquette.
And you started here in 1988.
1988, 27 years ago now.
Did you ever figure you'd be here for all those years?
You know, once I got up here, I really liked the area, and I started, you know, becoming part of the community, and I'm really fortunate that I've been able to stay up here. And of course, maybe everybody doesn't know this, but in television, radio, the higher the market, the more prestige, the more pay you get, and so on.
Right.
So our market is a starter market, and we've had legions of people come through here.
Yes.
And there's a few of us that have stuck around.
Well, it's the old veterans, you and Steve and Luds and Greg Trick.
Greg Trick.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, there have been a lot of changes, haven't there, in weather forecasting since you started?
There's been a lot of changes. Back when I first started, the TV station I was at, we had a metal board that we put like suns and clouds, and then we had another set where we had the chroma key, where you stand in front of a still radar image or satellite image. And then the station I worked at finally got computer graphics. That was back in, let's see, about 83.
Okay.
And then the computer graphics started to expand and get a little bit better, and then the internet came along. Right. And now I don't have to leave my house, and I can basically analyze all the weather maps and so on just from my home because of the internet.
All the tools that are available for weather forecasting, in addition to reporting on TV, are important, aren't they?
Oh, they really are. And now the computer graphics are so sophisticated, you can show so much that we couldn't show even 10 years ago.
Now, did satellite technology, does that precede you in weather, or did that?
Satellite technology really started in 1960. They sent up the first Tyros satellite. Yeah. But, you know, then it was a still image, and then the satellite resolution got better and better and better. Right. And it was really in 1979 that satellites started to be used to actually measure things like temperature and now we have a record of like global temperatures from 1979.
It's amazing how much information is kind of in the computer too. I mean, if you go back in the archives, and
Oh,
there's
yes.
just so much you can find out. Let's talk about El Nino.
Okay.
First of all, what is El Nino?
El Nino is a periodic oscillation of water, and it's also connected to pressure and wind in the equatorial Pacific. And El Nino, the warm phase, is when the warm water gathers close to the South American coast. And the opposite is La Nina, when there's colder than average water close to the South American coast.
And so that situation alone really affects weather in a big part of the globe.
Right, and it's kind of interesting. You look back, and it was Sir Gilbert Walker, right around the turn of the century. He was a British mathematician and physicist. He started looking at the pressure oscillations between Darwin and Tahiti, and he noticed that there was quite a change, and the corresponding weather patterns went along with these changes. And it was called the Southern Oscillation Index, and that is still used as one of the measures of El Nino. So we know, we can look back in the historic records at winters, and we can see and say, oh, that was an El Nino winter.
Do we know what causes this to happen?
You know, that's one thing. What came first, the chicken or the egg? It's a wind oscillation, but it's also a pressure oscillation, and it has to do with warm water. And what causes what? They're still not really clear on that. And as far as predicting it long term, no more than a season or two. That has improved too, but it's still something that's first really, it was back in the 80s that we first found out that it really had more of a global effect on weather. And maybe the 70s, it was 72, 73, there was a strong El Nino.
Okay. I want to find out what it means to us, and we'll do that in just a minute. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Well, we're talking with someone very familiar here on TV6 and throughout Upper Michigan, Karl Bohnak, talking about weather and El Nino. Okay, what does El Nino mean to us? Hopefully good things.
In general, well, it
depends on where you're coming from, right?
In general, an El Nino points toward a milder than average winter in the upper Midwest and the upper Great Lakes, including the Upper Peninsula. And it really seems to be correlated to the stronger the El Nino, the better chance we have of having a milder than average winter.
And this is being characterized as a very strong El Nino?
As a strong El Nino. There was a lot of hype earlier in the fall about this could be the strongest ever, which it really isn't. 97, 98, if you look at the water temperature profile, still stands out as the strongest El Nino of the modern era anyway.
And one of the ways we know what's going to happen is by looking back at the records. And what have we seen in the past?
Right. Well, for instance, and this was in my book, the warmest winter, and I would maybe say arguably the warmest winter, was 1877-78. And we can look back, like I said, I mentioned that Southern Oscillation Index. You can look back at that, and there was indications that that was a very strong El Nino. And that year, December was 12 degrees above average. January was the cold month, it was like 9 degrees. Then February was over 16 degrees above average, and March was over 16 degrees above average. So there was hardly any snow. John Longyear, he was a landlooker at the time. He was down in the southern UP, and he wrote in his journal that there was just a sprinkling of snow in places like the Paint River, the Michigamme River, where he was looking for lumber. And he said that the lumber companies had a very tough time that winter pulling logs out because there was no snow on the ground.
What was our most recent El Nino?
The most recent El Nino was 09-10. And that winter, there was a fair amount of snow here, and there was an early storm in December, but the winter overall was quite mild. December was kind of cold, and often that happens. It seems like winter will start out rather cold and then turn warmer, and January was quite warm, and then we had a early spring that year. Every El Nino is a little bit different. There's a different flavor to it. That one that had a really warm late winter into spring.
I think I heard you say on the weather report the other night, though, warm November means warm winter or something.
Right,
like
and
that.
this is apart from El Nino. I look back at all the Novembers in the record. First of all, in Marquette, and that goes back to 1875. And then once the Weather Service moved up the hill in '79, so there's 130 plus years. And out of all the Novembers, the warm ones, 3 degrees or more above average, if the November is 3 degrees or more above average, there's over an 80% chance of having a milder than average winter.
And I've often said, just without having any of that knowledge, that a lot about winter has to do with how it starts and how it finishes.
How it starts and how it finishes, and that's true. Now, on the other hand, like for instance, there was a rather strong El Nino in '72, '73. November into the first half of December was cold and snowy here. It looked like we were heading toward another cold winter. That was during that time period where there were a number of severe winters. And then all of a sudden, around Christmas time, it changed, and it turned out to be a very mild winter, and we had one of our least snowy winters in '72, '73.
What about lake effect? Because lake effect has a big effect on this area. Is that affected by El Nino?
It is, because if there's not the cold air supply available, you have to have, no matter how warm or whatever the lake is, and the fact that it's open, if the winds aren't right and if the air isn't cold enough, you're not going to get that much snow. So a warm winter will also usually mean less snow. There are exceptions, because sometimes we'll get a very active storm track during a warm winter, you know, the Colorado lows, and then we get a lot of system snow. But in general, an El Nino winter would mean less snow than average too.
Typically, how does the snow break down up here? Lake effect, system snow?
Well, if you look at the southern UP, places like Escanaba and Iron Mountain average about 50 to 60 inches of snow a year. You can more than double that up here. So lake effect is more than half of our snow total here.
Your book, is it still available?
Oh, it's still available. So Cold a Sky.
I know it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
Of the local bookstores?
It's still at some of the local bookstores. Every once in a while we'll get some calls. It's been out now for, wow, okay, this is going to be, it's going to be 10 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Next year.
Yeah. You're not here to promote your book, but nice idea for a Christmas gift or something.
Oh, it sure is, and we still get orders on Amazon, and it comes directly out of us. We set up our company, my wife and I, Cold Sky Publishing, and I'm working with Jack Dio now on another book that was part of a presentation we gave for the Historical Society, and we've given another couple of them, sunburns to snowstorms, a lot of historical photos and some weather comments. You know, it's amazing how many photos that Jack Dio has.
Yeah, he has a tremendous collection.
Really.
So you're betting on a warmer winter?
I can say confidently that we'll have a warmer winter than the last couple. Of course, 13-14 was historic cold, and last year we had the coldest November on record, plus the coldest February on record. So it will be warmer than that. Now, there's still some other things that point in the other direction as far as what's going on with warm pools and cold pools in the ocean. But the way it looks, El Nino is a real big factor this year.
I don't want to hear about those others. I want to hear about the warm winter.
Okay.
Thanks very much for coming in and sharing it this morning. Okay, back with more on the Ryan Report after this break. Time for a follow-up report. Earlier this year, we had a chance to meet Micaela Mayer, outstanding woman boxer, who has been training with veteran coach Al Mitchell in Marquette. Micaela's goal is to be part of the U.S. Olympic team in the next Olympics, and she took a major step in that direction 2 weeks ago by winning her weight class in the Olympic trials for women's boxing. While this was a key step to compete in the Olympics, she and the 2 other American team members need to qualify through the Continental Qualifiers or World Cup Championships next year. I talked with her coach Al Mitchell, who believes she has a great chance since she faced some very tough competition in the U.S. trials. For those who missed the earlier interview, I thought we'd share a few minutes of that conversation this morning. We asked Micaela about her training, which appears to be very intense.
It's a lot of work every morning, every evening, 6 days a week, so not a lot of time for much else.
You know, I have to ask you, how did this all begin? You know, when little kids play with baseballs, you know, they grow up and become baseball players, but you probably didn't start boxing when you were a kid.
I didn't, actually. I mean, most people who go out for the Olympics usually start their sport when they're 4, 5, or 6. Boxing's a little different, where, you know, the top girls in the world are in their late 20s. So I'm still somewhat young. I walked into the gym when I was 16. I think I was just about to turn 17. There was a Muay Thai gym by my house. And I just kind of wanted to get back into something. I hadn't done sports all through my high school years, but I did growing up, and I just kind of wanted to get back into something physical. So I walked in, I signed myself up, and within a week I was obsessed. You know, I wanted to be in the gym every single day, and that eventually crossed over into boxing, because there's just more of a ladder to climb in the US with boxing versus Muay Thai. And I wasn't happy with my training one day, and I went home. My dad has always been super supportive of my boxing. He has 3 daughters, so it was kind of cool for him to be involved. And he said, well, you know, there's this program on the USA Boxing website where you can go to Michigan and you can train with a top Olympic coach and you get a scholarship to college. And I said, really? He's like, yeah. So he gave them a call, and I was flying out within 2 weeks. You know, I'd quit my job and I just packed everything up and came right up here.
And unfortunately, that program has come to an end, hasn't it?
Unfortunately, after only 1 semester of school, the program had shut down, and I worked with Coach Al to try and keep it alive, but it just wasn't happening. And I knew that I couldn't leave Coach Al, because I knew that he was the one who was going to help me to reach my goals. So no program, you know, no school, but I still continued to come back here and train with him for every competition that I had.
Are you still taking classes at Northern? Or?
I am, and I took a little break because I was traveling back and forth between LA and Michigan, and it was just really hard. And eventually I said, you know, I just need to move there. I need to be with Coach Al full time, and that's when I enrolled back in school. So yeah, I'm slowly but surely trying to knock out college.
Tell us what it's like, you know, to train for something like this. For example, how much of it is physical training? How much of it is boxing strategy? Give us some insights into.
Well, there's definitely many different aspects. One, there's the technical aspect, and that's what I rely so heavily on Coach Al for. He's such a technician and a perfectionist, and you know, that's why I trust in him so much, and that's why I love working with him. And then there's the physical aspect. I mean, I've had, as a female, I've naturally had to work a lot on my strength. I feel like I'm still coming into my own as an athlete. You know, 5 years, 6 years ago when he first got me, I was nowhere near as strong as I am now. So that's another aspect you have to work in, is your strength and the weight training and all that you see me doing. And then the mental aspect, and that comes with experience, you know, getting in there, fighting, losing, being on a world stage, having to perform at the right moment. And that's all a whole nother aspect as well, which is something that you never stop growing with.
The psychological part of it, do you get disappointed? Do you get frustrated? Do you ever say, I'm not going to do this anymore?
That's the thing. I definitely always get frustrated, and I mean, it hurts because I put everything I have into this, so when I don't perform the way I want to, yeah, it definitely hurts and it brings me down for a little bit, but I've never ever told myself I'm done with boxing, or I'm quitting, or I'm not good enough. I've always believed that I could overcome it and persevere through it and learn from it, and that I'll be back the next time better.
Where are the top teams in the world? What countries have the top women's boxing teams?
Well, U.S. actually has one of the top women's boxing team. I think we're 2 right now, but we have a really good, strong team. But also China. So thanks to Coach Al, he's helping out my competition. And Russia, of course, is always a top country. In my weight class, Ireland is the reigning world champion and Olympic gold medalist. So I'd say those 3.
Do you know, when you strategize, do you try to figure out who your opponent's going to be in certain matches and
at this level,
know how to attack that opponent?
At this level, I basically know all my top competition because I've been competing against them for the last 5 years. However, this is Olympic-style boxing, and you go to a tournament and you don't know who you're going to fight. You don't know what country you're going to fight. You don't know who's going to show up, you know, so you have to be prepared to fight anyone in all different styles.
Congratulations to Micaela and Coach Al Mitchell for her hard-fought wins in the Olympic trials for women's boxing. With continued success, we'll be watching her next August in the 2016 Olympics in Rio, right here on TV6. Back in 2 minutes. Well, I complain a lot about the weather. And of course, with our changeable weather patterns, almost everyone you meet feels somewhat the same. But I would like to suggest to you that without the kind of weather we have here in Upper Michigan, human communication as we know it would come to a standstill. Why do I say that? Hey, how about this weather? Sure was cold last night. Supposed to be nice tomorrow. Here it might snow. Those statements were not intended as a weather forecast. They're typical of the first words exchanged when a couple of casual acquaintances meet on the street or at the supermarket. It's true. Weather is the consummate conversation icebreaker, no pun intended. When you want to start a conversation with a stranger, or even someone you know fairly well, if you didn't say something about the weather, what could you possibly say? Once you get the conversation started with the weather, you may find some other common interest to talk about, but not always. Once you blow all your weather material, you often just find yourself kind of looking at each other. My question is this a universal phenomenon or just something common to places like Upper Michigan where the weather can change, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a day? I can recall spending a week in Arizona once in early June. Every day the temperature was 90 and the skies were sunny. The TV meteorologist got excited one day when a few clouds came through. There was no rain, just a couple of clouds. I can't imagine the folks out there are spending much time talking about the weather. What do you say? Hot again today? So the next time you meet up with a casual acquaintance, try to start your conversation with something other than the weather. Instead, you could try, what could you try? I can't think of anything, I guess. The bottom line is that it's nice to know there's a plus to the weather we have. Good or bad, it at least gives us something to talk about. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Well, that's our show for this morning. I appreciate Karl Bohnak joining us to talk about El Nino and to provide his unique outlook on Upper Michigan weather. I also hope you enjoyed getting to meet Micaela Mayer. If she continues on her present course, we will see her in the Olympic Games next summer. Don't forget, you can also catch our show on the internet. Just go to uppermichigansource.com, click on the Features tab on the home page. One other very important reminder. The TV6 Canathon is now underway. We all need to do our part to help feed a hungry neighbor. Today's show is coming up next. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope we'll see you again next Sunday morning.